Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
Good to be back.
Thank you for being on. Now, there's ongoing public debate here in South Korea over the issue of animal rights, following revelations that one of the country's leading animal rights group had secretly euthanized more than 200 dogs under its care. So on this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of foreign journalists to discuss the various issues surrounding pets and animal rights. Now, recently, a senior manager at CARE, which stands for the Coexistence of Animal Rights on Earth, accused the organization of secretly euthanizing hundreds of animals. So, Fabian, what's your understanding of this whole CARE euthanizing scandal?
I mean, I was quite shocked, but not really surprised, because just from my anecdotal experience, I know that animal rights and also pet rights are underdeveloped in South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
From the historical context, I can understand that. I think it's also like a luxurious thing, like having pets, protect them. Was maybe not the first priority during the years of the economic boom.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I also thought about Moon Jae-in, the president, who was actually the only contender among the presidential contenders when he was elected, who put animal rights protection on his agenda, and he also adopted a dog from a shelter from CARE. So he was basically also deceived, like the public.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it was shocking when you're running an NGO and you depend on donors. You need their trust. You need to be transparent. And when you pretend you have a no-kill policy, and it turned out you kill 25% of the dog you're supposed to save, you kill them. I mean, of course, it's hugely problematic.
Now, other animal rights groups and their lawyers have pressed charges, criminal charges, against the head of CARE, Park So-yeon, accusing her of embezzlement, fraud, and indiscriminate euthanasia of animals. Among the wide and various points of public outrage directed at this head of CARE, which specific points do you most agree with, or do you most are angered by?
I think you need to point at the main one, which is violation of the no-kill policy. But one of the things that surprised me reading some of the research into this is that a no-kill policy can still be considered valid when animal rights organization or an adoption organization for pets is euthanizing up to 10% of the animals that it receives. And I thought, okay, that's a pretty high number. But obviously what's gone on at CARE is that this has been far exceeded. And they've taken in more animals than they could properly care for, which is another issue. There's not enough of these types of organizations and places where animals at risk can be looked after.
But the problem is the deception. I mean, they pretend, and the hypocrisy, because they pretend to save dogs from dog farms, and it's probably a good thing. But you cannot pretend to save dogs and criticize the dog breeders and then kill them for you to use too. And there is even some allegation by the whistleblowers that when journalists ask them 1 year later, like, oh, what did you do with the dog you saved 1 year ago? They brought other dogs to pretend that these were the dogs saved. So all this deception is completely outrageous.
Yeah, I completely agree. The cover-up measures also indicate a level of criminality attached to that. And then I think with NGOs also, you have to look at non-governmental organizations themselves don't have the sort of governmental regulation and oversight that a democratic organization has. An NGO isn't necessarily that democratically operated and that well regulated, and I think that comes to the surface in this case.
But I have to, I think we should not judge about the whole NGO as a whole, because about the euthanization, only the head of the group and a few executives knew about it. For example, the many employees demonstrated. They went to Central Seoul and they were crying in tears. They were as shocked as we are. And so I think you should be honest. Like the head of the organization put the whole NGO at danger because now all the donors will pull out. I mean, I wouldn't trust such an NGO anymore.
And not just that NGO, though, other NGOs in that whole industry of caring for animals and animal rights industry is going to be under some type of suspicion because of, like you mentioned, a few people's behavior.
Exactly.
Now, this incident, it has captured the public attention surrounding the issue of lost and abandoned pets, with many saying that this incident would not have taken place in the first place if there weren't so many homeless pets to begin with here in South Korea. According to one report released in 2017, the total number of lost or abandoned pets in the country during the previous year had topped the 100,000 mark. Many of these homeless pets are usually placed under the care of either private shelters or those funded by various regional governments. And this is not a problem being faced by South Korea alone. In other countries abroad, many pets are abandoned by their owners, particularly during the holiday seasons. So how serious is this issue of abandoned or lost pets in Canada?
I think it's a serious issue in Canada as well. There has been issues where in the province of Alberta, a pet store shut down and it had trouble in terms of how it was treating the animals in the pet store when it shut down. And also the number of abandoned animals is a big issue there. Not just dogs, but other animals as well. And the care of those animals in homes. More people in North America, and I think probably in Europe, are adopting other more exotic pets that are being treated in suspect manners by their owners. So this issue extends, I think, beyond just ordinary pets, cats and dogs.
Right. And for some of those more exotic animals that you mentioned, it brings to the question, should they be kept as house pets to begin with, if they're so wild animals?
In France, the problem of abandoned pets is growing, actually. According to the Society for the Protection of Animals, in the last 3 years, the number of abandoned cats was increased by 20%, of abandoned dogs by 6%, and they estimate the total number of abandoned animals every year to be 100,000 animals, which is a lot.
Right, it is a lot. Why do you think that is the case? I mean, I think we can safely assume that animal rights or the awareness of animal rights is actually increasing in many countries, but the rate of abandonment is actually increasing as well.
I think because we live in a society where everybody is a consumer and we consume pets the same way we consume mobile phone or TVs. And of course, there is a growing movement for animal rights, but I'm not sure if this movement is really understood by most of the people who actually own dogs, and if people who own pets understand that these are sentient beings that should be properly taken care of.
Right. Now, as one way to prevent this ongoing abandonment of pets and also to help pet owners find their pets if they are lost, South Korea has adopted a pet registration system since 2014. Despite this, however, the country has actually seen a steady rise in the number of lost and abandoned animals since 2014. What kind of measures are in place in Germany to prevent the abandonment or loss of pets?
Yeah, Germany is a federal state, so it really depends on which state of Germany, but the strictest state is Lower Saxony. It's right in central Germany. They not only have a dog registration that's basically mandatory everywhere in Germany, but you also have to have a dog license before you actually purchase a dog. That means before you buy it, there's one theoretical test. It's basically like a driver's license. You have to answer questions, and they're a little tricky. And once after the first year of keeping the dog, you have a practical test as well.
Oh, okay.
And there is some criticism because it's bureaucratic. You have to pay a little bit of money, but it's not a whole lot of money. It's in total maybe 100 euros. But I think it works quite well because it forces you to have some commitment and also to reflect on what it means to having a dog and keeping a pet. So in total, I'm actually in favor of this rather strict regulation.
And when you say the practical test, what are we talking about? What are we testing?
So, for example, how well trained the dog is, how well behaved the dog is. Basically, when you say sitz or like anjayo, then does the dog react or not? And the questions are, for example, should a dog be at a children's playground, or how long can a female dog, give birth to children? It's rather general, yeah. But I think it's a nice thing. But it's only in Lower Saxony.
Right. And what about in France?
In France, the law says that if you abandon your dog and you are caught, you can be punished up to 2 years in prison and a 30,000 euro fine. But the number of abandoned dogs is rising, so I don't think the law is really applied.
Yeah, it's not being enforced.
Exactly.
Is it?
And another thing that I found interesting, that since February 2015, the law said that animals are a living being that has sensitivity. They are not object anymore.
Right.
They used to be considered as just object, and now they're considered as human beings. So at least the law acknowledged that, but so far maybe it's not applied enough.
Okay. What about in Canada?
It's similar. It's similar to France. There are fines of a few $1,000s and potential jail sentences. But I think, as Frederick mentioned, the main problem, and I think they have similar laws here in South Korea even, the main problem is implementing the law, is enforcing the law.
Yeah.
So while those laws are on the books, they're probably rarely enforced.
So coming back to South Korea and following this controversy with CARE, South Korea's Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs has introduced new measures to firmly punish individuals who abandon their pets. Do you believe South Korea has strong enough punitive measures for those who abandon their pets?
Well, again, I think that they might have those measures, they might have those laws on the books, but like traffic laws, the problem isn't whether they're, in print, it's whether they're being enforced. And what there needs to be, just like traffic laws, is more enforcement. And one of the things that I discovered in earlier research into this is that there's a sort of cycle of pet adoption that takes place, and the breeding industry is overbreeding, especially certain breeds of dogs. And it's an industry, it's a consumer industry. So when those pets are not adopted at a certain point, then they're not needed. And so there's this excess, just like, products on a shelf that aren't being bought. There's this excess out there that I think is fueling this kind of pet abandonment. And again, the feeling in South Korea that pets are something of a consumption item and an accessory.
And yeah, I think the breeding industry, the pet shops, they should be higher regulated. Get them out of the shopping districts, the university districts, get them out of the window displays. Because it's really indicating that you buy like an affectionate or impulse purchase of dogs. Wow, that's a cute dog, I want to have him, I feel like having it, but don't really think about what it means to have a dog. And I mean, I could point out really many anecdotes. Lots of my acquaintances, they keep their dog in their one-room tel without them ever seeing daylight, and they think it's okay. I think it's sometimes the knowledge or the awareness of the problem is not really there.
I agree when you mentioned that in big cities people keep dogs in very small places. I feel very uncomfortable with that too. Maybe because I come from the countryside, so I'm used to see animals running outside, and I mean animals need to be outside, they need space, and spending their life in like really small rooms, I think it's not that good. I feel a bit uncomfortable.
Now, abandoned pets, they require support from the local community, from the local government, and also animal rights groups in terms of managing their care, from providing food to neutering, spraying them. How do you feel about public funds collected from taxpayers' money being used on these animals?
I mean, talking about Korea, I think there is so many social issues that seems... I mean, I don't say the animals is not an important issue, but I see other social issues that seems to me even more urgent and more important, like, for example, elderly.
Right.
When I see elderly people in my neighborhood, gathering card boxes and trash to make a living, I mean, I think we should have those people first. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything about animals. And as Frank and Fabien said, I think the dog breeding industry should be regulated, and maybe not using tax revenue to help animals, but just increase regulation to prevent the abuses from taking place.
Just to add to that, I would advocate taxing the pet industry to pay for the regulatory framework that it requires.
Because it is a cycle, isn't it?
Sure.
Cause and effect in the same industry.
You might assume that actually in Germany, where there are high taxes and a relatively wealthy country, that the state shoulders, the dog shelters. But no, actually, the largest part is from the civil society, because those shelters are organized by associations, by private people. There's a lot of volunteer work involved, membership fees, donations, and the local governments, the communities pay, like Cologne, for example, in the city of Cologne, it's 100 euros per dog. That's relatively small amount of money.
And the issue of spaying and neutering as well, some people say that that in itself is animal abuse. What are your thoughts on that?
Considering that 100,000 animals are being abandoned every year here in South Korea and in France, I would say spaying and neutering as a measure is taken in order to preserve better animal rights overall. While ideally I would say, yeah, sure, that is animal rights abuse, but I think the abuse of an industry that is creating a surplus in animals that are being abused on a massive scale is a larger animal rights abuse.
Okay. Now, there are also, I'm not sure if you have seen it during your time living in Korea, but sometimes there are little houses or little shelters set up for the stray dogs and cats in the community, and some people feed them, put blankets and put water there, much to the discontentment of other people in the neighborhood, because they fear that it'll attract more stray animals into that area. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, it's a tough issue. I think it definitely needs the permission of other people, people in the neighborhood to start to do this. I mean, it happened in my neighborhood, where some people ask us, oh, we want to install a small shelters for cats. And they went through every room in our apartment to ask everybody, every home to ask their permission. And I think that's a good approach, get consensus.
Well, I'm guilty of that. I sometimes feed stray cats, but I want to point out there are almost no stray dogs anymore in Korea. At least in Seoul, they're almost extinct. And compared to what my girlfriend, for example, tells me, when she was young, there were still a lot of stray dogs, and that would be more problematic, because when they get aggressive, cats. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if my decision is right or wrong, but it's more an emotional decision. And often you see that. The tails of the cat, for example, is cut off, maybe because they sleep under the car, and then in the morning when it drives off, it hurts them. And they don't have enough water, sometimes not enough food. And when you see that, I mean, it's what can you do? I think at least the cat, has a better time than maybe. But on the other hand, if the cat is not sterilized, then it could, just prolong the problem.
Right.
I'm not too sure. I mean, when I was a student, I lived on the first floor in a popular area, in an area where there was a lot of cats, and in the middle of the night when they were fighting, it can be really noisy.
Okay,
it can be really, really noisy.
Okay, yeah.
All right, now, in terms of adopting pets, we've talked about pet shops before. Some observers say that implementing more rigorous measures during the adoption process will go a long way in solving the issue of abandoned pets. In South Korea, most people adopt pets from their friends and family, while around 20% buy them from pet stores. How are pets usually adopted in France?
My family comes from the countryside, so the way it works usually, you have a neighbor or a friend, and their own dog has some babies, and then they share, and that's. I'm pretty sure you can buy. There is some shops, but usually it's more like people around you give you babies.
Right. And same for Germany?
In Germany, sometimes it's farmers who actually have on the side, sometimes they have cats or dogs, and you can go to the farmer, but that's on the countryside. So there are also pet stores and pet shops in Germany, but usually they're a little bit outside of the city. So you intentionally have to drive there and make a decision to.
When I was a youngster, we got our pet from a shelter. It was adopted. It wasn't a purebred type of animal.
It was an adult?
No, it was a puppy. But pet stores don't sell large pets.
Right.
They sell like fish and maybe hamsters, things like that, right? They don't sell dogs and cats, at least, when I was growing up in Canada. If you wanted a larger animal, you had to drive out further and go to a shelter and pick one that way. It wasn't treated like a commodity.
What about professional breeders? Are they quite common in Canada?
Sure, yeah, I'm sure that there are professional breeders, but I think that that's more of a subset of a greater pet adoption system. And just like in other countries, when a pet has a puppies, they look for another home for it. And I think the greater issue, again, is how prepared is that person that's adopting the pet to take on the lifelong commitment that they need to make to that pet. The dog that we adopted stayed with us throughout its entire life for almost 20 years. So that's the kind of commitment that people have to make when they adopt and consider an adoption of a cat or a dog especially.
Although the number of pets has topped the 10 million mark here in South Korea, there are still many people in the country who are either fearful or uncomfortable in the presence of animals. This has made it especially important for pet owners to abide by common rules and etiquette, or so-called petiquette, especially in public spaces such as keeping a leash on their dogs at all times and carrying a waste bag to clean up after their pets. What are some widely accepted and widely practiced petiquette in your country, in France?
Yeah, take the droppings is probably the most important thing that I can think of. I mean, now it's getting better, but in Paris a couple of years ago, you could go there and I was ashamed to see so many. It smells bad, it's dangerous, you can sleep on it, and they started, as far as I can remember, the city administration started a campaign to tell owners, you have to take care of your dog's droppings. And as well, when the animals are dangerous, you should put a muzzle, a leash, this kind of very basic stuff.
Is it etiquette or is it regulated by law?
It's for the muzzle and the leash is regulated by law only if they are dangerous dogs for some specific breeds. Exactly.
Okay.
And I think in Germany then it's a little bit stricter. It depends on which city or which state you go to, but in most cities you only have special dog areas in some forests or parks where you can unleash your dogs. Otherwise, in most cases, you have to leash your dogs in the city. Then, of course, like the droppings, that's statewide. You have to do it. You have to take care of it. And in some cities, they are also very specific about what kind of dog breed you have. For example, let's say a pit bull, he should always wear something in front of his...
A muzzle.
But scientifically, it's hard to justify that because it's not only about, you cannot generalize this breed is always aggressive and others are not, so it's also a little bit problematic.
Yeah, it's more on an individual basis as well.
In Canada, it's the same type of thing. You have to leash your dog when you take it out, and I think it's managed, regulated by municipality and citywide.
Same here in Korea as well. Dog owners in South Korea, they will be required by law to keep a leash on their dogs at all times, effective as of this March. Now, for our final question, what can we do to better protect animal rights while at the same time ensuring a peaceful coexistence between pet owners and people who might not be too fond of animals?
I think we should not forget that animals are living beings with a sensitivity, they suffer. And the issue is really not related. Today we talk about dogs and cats mostly, but the issue is not related to them. For example, the cow or the pig breeding industry, the conditions for the animals are appalling. It's disgusting what we make these animals suffer. For example, pigs, they spend their life in a cage where it's so narrow, they can't even turn themselves. Their babies are taken at birth. They're really, this is hell for all these animals, and this is on an industrial scale in many countries. So I hope that in the future, when we look back at the way we humans treated animals, we'll be ashamed, and I hope this will change.
I think next to regulating the pet industry, one really useful or efficient way of creating awareness among the people is if you would, in elementary school or high school, make it mandatory to visit an animal shelter. I still remember I did that. I'm not sure if it's mandatory actually in Germany, but once you visit that with your classmates and you talk about it, then I'm sure you will. This is it will last in your memory. It's really a sustainable experience.
And the idea of visiting an animal shelter is great, and I think we should apply that to the meat industry and have people visit the slaughterhouses of pigs and cows and chickens, to get a better idea of how we treat those animals. Because when we look at the earth, every scientist is saying we need to reduce the amount of especially red meats that we eat so that there's enough on the planet to go around.
All right. We'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mahatma Gandhi said this to say about animal rights. The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. Perhaps the ongoing debate here in South Korea over the issue of animal rights is an indication that its people are striving to build a better and more humane society for all to enjoy. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.